Hey guys, Brian here from Better Chess Training, and in today's video, I'd like to share my first game over the board for 2022. And I'm going to make it a little goal of mine to make a video of every tournament or over the board game that I play this year. Um, I'm not as, I guess, as prolific as other players with the over the board play. So it should be doable. And hopefully they'll be instructive and entertaining games for you to watch. In any case, first game here, this was a quad format, so four players, and we play each other once. The time control was game in 40 with a 5 second delay, so not super fast, but also but fairly rapid. So you had to think fairly quickly. And again, this is my first game of 2022, and let's get right into it. My opponent is playing black here. His name was Castro-Pierson, very nice guy, rated about 1800. So let's take a look. We started out with e4. He started out with knight to c6, the Nimzovich defense. This, of course, can transpose into a lot of things. And here I play knight to f3. Now, if he were to play e5, this just goes right into our normal e4, e5 repertoire. And here I play the Roy Lopez. But instead, he played d6. And so now this can transpose into a lot of things, including the Philidor, which I was preparing for. But in any case, d4 is the standard move here, taking up space, and that was what was played. And now knight to f6. So very interesting opening in terms of move order. And you have to be aware of this when you're developing your openings, is understand where the different openings can go. So here I play knight to c3. And there's a few options here, actually. The most popular option is bishop to g4, in which case I play bishop to b5, but that's not the only move that can be played, of course. And here we could also transpose into the Philidor still with e5, in which case I would play probably bishop to c4. But my opponent actually transposes into sort of a Perk defense, or Peart's defense, depending on how you want to pronounce it, with g6. Now, there's a few ways you can go here. One way that's recommended in one of my opening books is bishop to b5. Pretty straightforward. And here I decided to play, actually, it's the most popular move, which is h3, just preventing anything from coming here to g4. Now, something to note here, and I'll just go back real quick. The normal Peart's move order, which would go something like this, has a few different options, but the main thing to note here is that what black will often do is play c6 and then try to play b5 to get this counterplay on the queen side. So if we go to, and now I have various ways of combating this as well. I would h3, this is just an example, and then f4 with this broad pawn center. So I want you to compare this particular position with what happened in the game. Let's go back to the game position here. So in this particular position, now the c6 isn't available, but I've also blocked my f pawn. So it's one of those things where it's not exactly, you have to be careful not to superimpose the ideas from one particular structure to another. So, however, I do feel I am feeling pretty good in this particular position at this point in the game. Okay, let's keep moving here. My opponent plays bishop to g7. Very logical follow-up. And here I play bishop to e3, adding another defender here. And there's some ideas maybe of eventually trading off this bishop. And that's pretty standard in these types of positions, whether it be the Sicilian Dragon, anything where you have this fianchetto type of thing. Okay, black castles, and here queen to d2. And here my opponent plays e5. Again, standard, very similar to kind of a King's Indian structures. And The reason I mention this is that a lot of these ideas can kind of go back because the pawn structure kind of dictates what the ideas are. So, for example, here, if I were to play d5, and then my opponent can say go back here to e7, a common plan would be to either play c6 or f5 eventually. Prepare for that. That would be very similar to the King's Indian, if not directly transposing into one of the King's Indian lines. But that didn't happen. One of the things I've been trying to work on is knowing when to resolve this tension. So you see here, there is this tension between these two pawns. Now, there's a few things we can do, right? We can capture on e5, we can push to d5, or what I did in the game is keep the tension. And the general idea here is that we don't want to resolve the tension unless we feel that it gives us some type of, unless we think it's the best option, it gives us some type of advantage. Because oftentimes, when your opponent is the one who does the capturing or the relieving of the tension, it gives us a chance to do something more dynamic, like develop a piece, for example, or open a line because of that resolution. And we'll see that a little bit in this game. So here I castle, and we're seeing that my play is going to maybe come on the king side. And typically, again, he's looking for this f5 type of break, for example, okay? So here, my opponent plays knight to d7. And again, this idea is that he wants to eventually play this. Now, he does have another idea, which I didn't think about as much, which is eventually to put this knight here. But we'll see that that doesn't necessarily do anything too great. So knowing that he wants to play f5 here, again, I'm struck with the decision. One of the things I was thinking of doing was playing d5 here with this idea that now he's getting kind of cramped, and then maybe following up with g4, just putting a lockdown on this f5 square. But during the game, and again, the engine seems to agree with me a little bit, although this d5 plan is not bad at all. It still, I think, leads to a white advantage. We have a nice space advantage. So d5 is definitely possible here. But my thought was during the game was I really wanted to force black to try to come up with ideas that weren't standard. Meaning, I wanted to make it hard for him to come up with a plan. And to do that, I wanted to give him a lot of options. So here, I actually played g4. Now, what is the idea behind this? Of course, as I said earlier, we want to lock down this f5 break. What does the f5 break do, by the way? It just opens up, it will open up lines. It'll help give black space, and it contributes to what black's plan usually is, which is to free this bishop. And a lot of times in the King's Indian, it's an attack on the king side. But because I castled queen side, it isn't necessarily the case. But in any case, it's still something that he might want to do. So I shut that down. But also what I do is his other break, if I were, for example, to play this, is to play c6. So I'm kind of delaying making that decision or giving him that decision. So it forces him to figure out what he wants to do, knowing that he can't kind of do it automatically. Okay. And it gives him, basically, I'm giving him chances to go wrong, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. So here he takes on d4. And again, this resolution of tension, what happens here? I take on d4, and we can see here that black is at a space disadvantage because I have these pawns here. Now playing this f5 doesn't look so great here. Now he will get the half-open e-file, but it's fairly easily defended with, say, a move like f3 or bishop to g2, just as an example. So I'm feeling pretty good in this position, kind of just sharing what I was thinking during the game. And here my opponent grabs this e5 square. And I guess I'm feeling pretty good about this position, but it's not like it's totally won. But there's a couple factors that I really liked about it. First, these knights, there's yeah, e5 is a great square. At some point, I can play f4, but uh, the point here is that he's got this great square on e5, but he's got three pieces that would love to use it. He'd love to have the bishop open here. He'd love to have this knight here, but he can only put one piece on it. So I really felt that this is those famous superfluous knights where they have one square that they can that only one of them can use at a time. So it's sort of like they're not fully activated. Of course, they do protect each other as well. Anyways, kind of babbling a little bit. One of the things I first thought of was the move f4. So let me put that on the board. And if you want, you can take a moment, pause the video if you want to, and tell me what is wrong about that move and why I rejected it. Okay, so f4 seems like a great move. We're attacking this knight and not really giving it any place to go. These squares are covered. Of course, he doesn't want to necessarily sacrifice for a pawn. And we would think that it would force him back to d7, which you could see here just, cramping of pieces looks good. But black has another move. So I hope you found it. And it's knight takes d4. And the problem here is if we take with the bishop, he gets this nice fork. Of course, I don't want him to take my queen. And he wins this piece for... wins this piece. I don't think it's for a pawn. I think he just wins it outright. So he's got more material than me. Now, I do have some compensation. I have some space, but I'd rather have the material in this case. So that's why f4 wasn't good. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we want to keep the tension sometimes. It's a good principle to think about because we want to let him make the mistakes and we want to pounce on them. So the problem with that last variation that I showed you with f4 was that the f3 square was open and allowed this fork. So I played the natural move to eliminate that, which is bishop to e2. Again, asking the question of black, what do you want to do? Of course, at any time, I also figured that any capture on d4 is fine for white. Okay? So bishop to e2, and I think that was the best move here. I think white has a decent advantage, and the engines would tend to agree. And here my opponent plays an odd move, queen to e7. And I think what he's trying to do is maybe either bring his rook over to the d file and prepare a d5 break, or bring it to the e file, again, thinking about this f5 break, where maybe he can eye one of these bishops with a battery of the queen and rook. The problem is I get to move next. So, knight to d5. Now here it's quite dangerous because this c7 square is hanging. So of course, if you play something like queen to d7, the problem here is that there's actually a lot of great moves here. I can trap his knight with f4. Actually, I think that's what I was thinking about during the game. But I could also go on with this plan of just targeting the c7 pawn, which we'll actually see in a little bit. The other problem here, if he goes, say, to e7, then we get this fork. Let's see, where else can he go that's not good? Of course, he can't go here, can't go here. He can do something like this, but at the very least, he's giving up this c7 pawn. So assuming he doesn't want to do any of that, he chose the sort of the lesser of all the evils, which is queen to d8. And here, I saw that there's no way he could add another defender, so I played knight to b5. So at the very least, I'm looking to win a pawn on c7, so I'm feeling pretty good right now. Here, my opponent plays knight to e7, attacking, and here I missed an opportunity. So what I want you to do, again, if you wish, is pause the video and try to figure out what the best move would be. Now, the move I did play was also pretty good. So if you find that move, which I'll show you momentarily, that is good as well. But go ahead, pause the video, give yourself a minute or two, see if you can, what would you play in this particular position? Okay, here during the game, I actually played knight b takes c7, which of course attacks the rook and wins a pawn. But slightly better is knight d to c7. Again, we're attacking the rook, and the problem is after the rook moves, well, there's a few things we can take here, but one way is to just win the exchange here with bishop takes a7. Okay, the engine says to go this way with the bishop, kind of giving the rook a square, also maybe threatening here, and then we can win the exchange. And in this particular position, we're doing quite well. Okay, of course, I did not see that during the game, but I did play this move. And here I had to calculate whether or not I was going to take on a8 next, or whether after he plays knight takes d5. So the best move here is what I played in the game, which is knight takes d5. But I wanted to show you, I did consider this, but then after knight takes e3, queen takes e3, and say something like bishop to e6, the game is kind of even because this knight cannot get out. I can play a move like f4 to try to just delay, and after knight to c6, I'm going to lose this and be at a very slight, I believe, very slight material disadvantage. So this is about even, maybe slightly better for black. Okay, but I saw that during the game, so played knight takes d5. Now, this knight is sitting very pretty, cannot be attacked by pawns. So my opponent, of course, attacks here with bishop to e6, very natural. And here I choose to play f4. Now, this move is fine. At this point of the game, and in analyzing this, there were a few points where the engine pointed out better moves. But as you'll see in this game, the moves I made were very logical and never really changed the evaluation. So that's a case when you're analyzing with the chess engine that I think you can just, obviously it's good to look to see if you could find better moves. But when you're already winning by a lot, you just have to stay winning by a lot in order for you to, keep progressing along with your, the game. Okay, playing f4. Obviously, just trying to prevent him from using this square. Goes back to knight to c6. And the idea behind the f4, which I saw here, was to play f5. Now, part of the idea here, yes, I'm up a pawn. So, of course, any trades moving towards the end game will be good for me. But I also wanted to, I do have some ideas here on the king side. Now, just to show you, these aren't the moves that were played. But, for example, if he takes here, I open up the G file, and now this can become very dangerous. So he takes on D5, and here I take with the queen, and this is one of those points. The engine is saying taking with the pawn is very slightly better, but again, from a human point of view, it seems more natural to keep this. I think it's probably better to keep the queen, keep this file open so that I can attack this d6 pawn eventually. So here, the knight attacks my queen, and here I play queen to b3. And of course, I have to stay protecting the a2 pawn here. I don't want to give up any pawns here. I'm only a pawn up. I think my position is dominant, but I'm really only a pawn up, so there's no need to sacrifice any pawns here. Okay, he protects his knight with a5, and here I play c3. And again, this is fine, and my idea here is just to sort of block this bishop a little bit. But I guess a3 would have been good as well, because later I might want to play this anyway in case he pushes the a pawn. But here I play c3, and his knight goes back. Or actually, he doesn't. His knight doesn't go back yet. He pins my pawn first. So I move my king out of the way, and now his knight goes back. Okay. Here, I play queen d5, simply threatening to take here on d6. And so my opponent protects. And here I thought was a good time to exchange on g6. Like I said before about keeping the tension, the idea here is that this pawn is pinned. So when I capture on g6, he has to capture with the h file or with the h pawn, which allows me the opportunity to work on opening the h file. Okay, f takes g6, h takes g6, and h4. Now my opponent, well, first he takes a move and attacks my queen. And here there's a bunch of great places I could put my queen. One that I thought about was just offering to exchange queens, in which case, again, being a pawn up and with black with a bunch of weaknesses is probably good. But I wanted to keep the queen on the board just in case I actually did get this h-file open and start an attack. And so I moved it back to d2. Here my opponent plays f6. And the idea here is if I play g5, maybe to try to keep things closed here with f5. After f6, I wasn't in a ton of time trouble, but I kind of believed him about this idea here. And I played rook to f1, rook d to f1. Again, it's still winning, just putting more pressure here. So here in this particular position, the best move, although like I said, there's a bunch of good moves, is g5. And here's the idea, is that now I'm fixing this pawn on the g file so that when I push h5, he can't advance it. So whenever you're trying to open a file, you always want to fix the pawn that's, prevent that pawn that's going to be attacked from advancing. And so g5 would have been best. Of course, if he takes, we don't take back necessarily. Although, again, that would be fine. We could actually play h5 here. And planning to open the h-file this way while still maintaining pressure on this pawn. So if he plays f5, we play h5. Now, of course, if he takes, that's good for us. But he might play f4. And here, we just had to calculate a little bit here. Bishop to d4. This is not what happened in the game, by the way, but just showing you what could happen. And then if he were to push again, we just have to bring this bishop to safety. There's a bunch of places. We could go here, or we can go here. They're both about the same in terms of evaluation. But then after that point, black can no longer stall or prevent white from opening the h-file. And so then we will have a lot of action eventually down the h-file and against the king in general. But in any case, that's a short diversion. Let's go back to the game. I did play rook d to f1. And here my opponent plays rook to c8. Not really too much to happen here. But again, sort of in quasi-time trouble. I think I probably had about 5 or 6 minutes left here. I played bishop to d4 just in case he wanted to think about some sacrifices here. But again, I don't think any of them would really work. And here he plays king to g7. And I played my bishop back, again threatening this skewer here. So he brings it back to g8. And now I play g5, realizing, which I could have realized earlier, that I could play h5 next. So here he plays king to g7. And now I open the g file. And he takes back with the bishop, which allows me to play bishop to h6 check, winning the exchange. And here he resigned. But even if he didn't, if he took back with, let's go back a couple moves. Even if he took back with the rook, I could simply trade and then continue to go about my business here. Playing h5, of course, if he opens it, probably not such a great idea. But even if he advances, I can choose among a few choices, including just winning that pawn. So here in the game, at this moment, my opponent resigned. Hey, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And I want to keep the suspense, but the rest of this tournament went really well for me. I went 2.5 out of 3 to win the quad. And it was a good start to the year. So I hope you guys are looking to have a great 2022 with your chess as well. If you're not subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button down below. I'm going to be sharing more videos and more advice and lessons I've learned along the way. As you know, I am also on this journey of chess improvement. So let's travel together. Hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.